You really shouldn't wander around the house at your age. People your age get confused," my son's wife, Melissa, said as she pointed her thumb toward the basement door. Her voice had that sharp little edge she used when she wanted to remind someone of their place. Then she smirked and added, "She likes the quiet down there, and I need her old room for my gym. You understand, right?" My hand tightened around the railing. I swear I felt my heart flutter the way it does when I stand up too fast. A cold pulse went down my arms. You know that feeling where your body reacts before your mind catches up? That happened the second she said quiet down there. I'd heard a lot of cruel lines in my years working finance investigations, but something about this, something about her saying it so casually, it made my breath stumble. I tried to answer, but my throat felt tight. The basement. My granddaughter, Lily, 8 years old, sleeping in a cellar like a forgotten box of winter coats. I looked at the closed basement door. Metal handle, chipped white paint, and that faint mildew smell drifting up, and my knees softened just a little. I had to put a hand against the wall to steady myself. "Relax," Melissa said, flicking her hand like I was a fly buzzing around her. "You wouldn't get it. Kids are flexible. And you, well, you're from another era." Another era. That one always stings in a way younger people don't really understand. They think it's harmless. But when someone uses your age as a dismissal, especially when you're trying to protect a child, it cuts deep. And she knew exactly what she was doing. I didn't say anything at first. I just listened. That's something age teaches you. The quieter you get, the louder people show you who they really are. And Melissa had been getting louder for months. I reached down, opened the basement door, and felt a wave of cold air roll up against my face. It smelled like damp concrete and old cardboard. When I called softly down, "Lily?" her small voice echoed back, thin and sleepy. She sounded so far away, too far for a child to be sleeping. Something twisted in my chest then. I'm not talking metaphorically. I mean an actual twist, a deep tightening that made me press my palm to my sternum. That's when I knew something wasn't just wrong. Something was deeply, deliberately cruel. Before I go any further, let me pause a moment and speak directly to you. Before I share this story, please subscribe and let me know in the comments which city or location you are watching from. I always like to know where folks are listening in from. Now, back to that basement air hitting my face. Melissa leaned against the door frame and said, "Close that, please. The smell drifts upstairs." I looked at her then, really looked. And in that moment, I realized something important. She thought I was weak. She thought the gray hair, the slower steps, the careful breaths meant I couldn't do a thing to stop her. She didn't know who she was dealing with. And she had no idea what I had already noticed on the kitchen counter earlier that morning. One piece of paper that would change everything. I stood there a moment longer with that cold basement air drifting around my ankles, and something old inside me stirred. You know when a memory comes back so sharply it feels physical, like someone pressed on a bruise you forgot you had? That's what hit me. Because this house wasn't just wood, plaster, and mortgage notices. This house was my life's work. My fingerprints were on every corner of it. I remember the day I first walked this plot with my late wife, Anna. The grass hadn't even been cut then. She held my arm and said she could already picture the swing set in the back. I can still hear her laugh, soft and warm, the way she used to get when she talked about the future. After she passed, I built the foundation myself every weekend, brick after brick, just to keep breathing. And when my son, Michael, was little,
I sanded the stairs by hand so he wouldn't get splinters. Those stairs, Melissa now marches up and down like she owns the place. Funny how time changes who respects what. Maybe that's why the basement hit me as hard as it did. Not just because Lily was down there, but because I could picture Anna's face if she knew a child, her only granddaughter, was being tucked away like an inconvenience. Pain travels through generations in ways people don't realize. But so does love. I felt both at once, squeezing my chest until I had to lean against the wall again. I closed the basement door gently, and when I turned back into the living room, I let my eyes drift around like I was seeing it for the first time. The photo frames I bought, the couch I helped them move, the repaired window latch I fixed after a storm. I thought about every time I came over to babysit just so they could save money. Every time I picked up groceries without mentioning it. Every time I pretended not to notice Melissa rolling her eyes when I offered to help. A young person's eye roll can cut deeper than a knife when you've spent your life giving. My heart gave a little stutter then. I hate that part of getting older. Your body doesn't warn you, it just misfires like an old switchboard. But I took a breath and steadied myself. I'd lived long enough to know you can be shaking on the inside and still move forward like a stone. I walked down the hall and peeked into Lily's room, the room that was supposed to be hers. The sunlight came through the window like it always did, landing on the little stuffed bear I had given her for her 5th birthday. But now the walls were bare, the princess curtains gone. Melissa had stripped the room clean like she was erasing Lily from her own home, and that, more than anything, made something old and fierce rise in me, a kind of quiet anger that doesn't shout, it just decides. I whispered almost to myself, "Not again. Not my family. Not in this house." And that's when the weight of everything settled on me. The long years, the sacrifices, the memories, the love, the losses. It wasn't just about a basement. It was about dignity, legacy, responsibility. A man's duty doesn't disappear with age. It deepens. If you've ever felt that shift, the moment you know you can't stay silent anymore, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Before I move on, let me say this. If you're still here with me, take a second to subscribe. These stories matter, and sharing them helps folks remember what family is supposed to mean.
The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. My body does that when something isn't sitting right. The house was quiet, and that kind of quiet feels different when you know a child spent the night on a concrete floor below your feet. I rubbed my knees before standing. They always warm up slow in the mornings now. But my mind was awake, sharp. I've seen enough shady paperwork in my years to know when trouble is hiding in plain sight, and what I'd glimpsed on the kitchen counter kept replaying in my head like a little alarm bell. I walked into the kitchen and scanned the counter carefully. I didn't want to look obvious. Melissa hated when someone touched her organized spaces. But I saw the corner of a white envelope sticking out from under a pile of fitness magazines. I eased one magazine aside, slow enough that it wouldn't scrape. There it was, a thick envelope from the mortgage company. When you've lived 72 years, you know the weight of bad news just by the feel of the paper. I slid it closer, keeping one hand steady on the counter, because a little wave of dizziness surprised me. Happens sometimes when I tilt too fast. I breathed through it. Then I lifted the flap with my thumb, careful not to tear it, old habit from examining sensitive documents. Inside was a printed notice. Past due, amount owed, red letters, dates, auction schedule. My heart hiccuped. Not in a poetic way, an actual misfire that made me tighten my jaw and grip the counter harder. When you're older, your body gives you these tiny electric warnings. I scanned the numbers. I didn't blink. If you blink, you lose your place.
A few pages deeper, I found something even worse. Notices addressed to Michael, my son, but stamped, "Delivery redirected per request." Someone had rerouted his mail. That is not an accident. That is an intention. I heard footsteps, quick ones. Melissa. I tucked the papers back in their exact original angle and pretended to be rinsing my coffee mug. She walked in wearing bright athletic gear, ponytail high, voice sharp. "You're up early. Did you get confused about the time again?" There it was, the jab. She couldn't help herself. I said nothing. Letting silence do the work is something younger folks underestimate. She opened the fridge, slammed it shut, then opened it again like it owed her an apology. "By the way," she said, "we'll be doing some renovations soon. Try not to get in the way. The house needs a modern touch." There it was. Her plan was moving forward while I was still processing the foreclosure numbers. Active friction. Every second I researched, she was accelerating. When she left the room, I reached into my coat pocket and took out my old phone. The one I keep only because it still has the contacts I trust. I scrolled slowly. My fingers aren't as fast as they used to be. I found the name. Carl. An old coworker from my financial investigations days. The kind of man who knew exactly where debts traveled once they left the original lender. I stepped onto the back porch for better reception. Each button press felt deliberate. When Carl answered, I kept my voice level. "Carl, I need to trace a mortgage that's in active foreclosure. Quietly." He paused. "You okay? You sound winded." "I'm fine," I said, though my chest still felt tight. "Just need to know who's set to buy this debt." He agreed to look into it. Said it might take a day. A day. That's a long time when a child is sleeping in a basement and the woman responsible for it is planning a future built on lies. And I had the sinking feeling that while I waited, Melissa wasn't going to slow down one bit.
Carl called me back the next morning, earlier than I expected, but not early enough to ease the knot that had been sitting under my ribs all night. I hadn't slept well. When I closed my eyes, all I could see was that cold basement and the thin little voice of my granddaughter Lily drifting up from the darkness. I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee I barely touched because my hands were trembling just enough that the surface kept rippling. Age does that to you. Your mind sharpens under stress, but your body shows the wear. When the phone rang, I steadied it with both hands. Carl said he'd traced the foreclosure process, but couldn't get me full details without authorization. Privacy laws, he reminded me. Regulations. Departments that opened late. Forms not yet processed. Things I used to handle with a single phone call now required half a dozen people and a waiting period. That's the part of aging nobody warns you about. The world speeds up as your body slows down. When the phone rang, I steadied it with both hands. Carl said he'd traced the foreclosure process, but couldn't get me full details without authorization. Privacy laws, he reminded me. Regulations. Departments that opened late. Forms not yet processed. Things I used to handle with a single phone call now required half a dozen people and a waiting period. That's the part of aging nobody warns you about. The world speeds up as your body slows down. I thanked him and hung up. But the moment I did, I heard Melissa's voice carrying from the hallway. She was on her phone, talking fast, excited. I moved closer, walking heel to toe so the old floorboards wouldn't squeak. You learn those tricks when you raise a son who used to sneak out as a teenager. "Yes, I want to tear that wall down," she was saying. "The room is way too small for a proper gym. And once we're out of here, I want the whole space redesigned in the new place anyway." Out of here. New place. She already had plans for a home they didn't own yet. Meanwhile, the house they lived in was being swallowed by debt she never bothered to tell my son Michael about. I backed away before she saw me. My heart had started its uneven thumping again, like a loose engine belt. I leaned on the counter until it steadied. Stress doesn't just sit in your mind when you're my age. It lands in your joints, your breath, your pulse. I knew I needed the bank records. Not guesses, not hunches, proof. So I drove to the bank.
My truck isn't young, and neither am I, so it took a moment for my knees to adjust after sitting. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed, and the clerk behind the counter gave me the practiced smile they give old men who look confused. I spoke calmly, clearly. I told her I needed to know the status of the mortgage tied to the house address. She asked for authorization. I didn't have it. She apologized. Policies, regulations. She couldn't help without written consent from the homeowners. I felt that familiar frustration rising, the kind that makes your chest feel tight and your breath go shallow. I asked to speak to the manager. The clerk hesitated, but eventually led me into a small glass-walled office. The manager was polite but firm. Without my son's signature, he couldn't release a thing. I could feel a light sweat forming at the back of my neck. Stress sweat. The kind older men get when the stakes are high and the outcome uncertain. While he talked, my phone buzzed. A text from Michael. Only one line. "We're clearing out Lily's room today. Melissa says it's for her fitness routine." Delays at the bank meant danger back home. I thanked the manager and walked out before my breath gave away the panic sitting under it. Outside, I gripped the steering wheel and let the truth settle like a weight. Every minute I spent waiting politely for institutions to open their doors, Melissa was pushing her plan forward. Renovations, gym equipment, erasing Lily from her own bedroom, all while hiding a foreclosure only days away. And the worst part? My son didn't even realize he was standing on a sinking ship.
I drove home slow, not because I wanted to, but because my hands wouldn't stop that faint trembling they get when I'm holding too much information at once. Age does that to you. Your mind processes the danger faster than your pulse can keep up. By the time I pulled into the driveway, my breath had that slight hitch in it again, like a gear catching on the teeth. I sat there a moment, just letting the engine tick and cool, thinking through everything I'd learned. When you've spent decades tracing money trails, you know that numbers don't lie, but people do, especially people like Melissa. Inside, the house was loud, furniture being dragged, boxes being taped shut. Melissa was giving orders like she was running a renovation crew. My son, Michael, was moving Lily's dresser out of her room. His face looked defeated, but he kept his head down. I could tell he didn't want to argue. That's the thing about manipulation. You never notice it happening until someone points out the pattern. I didn't interrupt. I went straight to the kitchen table, took out my old notebook, and started reconstructing the mortgage timeline from memory. This is where the silent legend part of my life kicks in. I spent 40 years looking at financial statements, tracing embezzlement through fake companies and offshore accounts. People think that was thrilling work, but most of it is patience and pattern recognition. You look at dates, numbers, signatures. You wait for something to be out of place. I recreated the due dates from the letter I read earlier. Past due cycles, penalty charges, auction date. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I pulled up the local secondary debt marketplace on my phone. The site has changed since I used it professionally. Smaller buttons, brighter colors. It took me a minute to figure out how to zoom in properly. My thumbs aren't as quick as they used to be, and I had to steady the phone when a little shake blurred the screen. But once I got the layout right, instinct took over. I searched the property ID. Nothing at first. That was expected. Foreclosure deaths sometimes get grouped under different vendors while being processed. So I tried the parcel number instead. Still nothing. That's when I leaned in closer, feeling a small spark of irritation mix with adrenaline. I knew the debt should be listed somewhere. I checked the lender's auction schedule. That's when I saw it. An item marked with a temporary identifier. Just a number, no address. But the date matched exactly, and the debt amount matched to the dollar. My pulse kicked hard, a real thud, the kind that makes you press a hand to your chest. I clicked the listing. It was set to be sold in 48 hours. 48 hours before Melissa's big remodel. 48 hours before Michael lost the last gift his mother ever touched. Then, something else hit me, hard.
The buyer listed was a private entity. No address, no name. Just a shell company that specialized in distressed properties. And I recognized the pattern of that company name. I'd investigated similar setups decades ago. Someone was preparing to sweep that house out from under them the second the auction closed. I closed my eyes and breathed through the tightness in my ribs. The kind of breath where you push air out slowly because your heart needs a second to catch up. That debt was about to disappear into a place no ordinary person could reach. But I wasn't just any ordinary person. I knew the back doors. I knew how secondary markets worked. And I knew exactly how to get there before the wrong hands did. As I opened my eyes, I heard Melissa's voice behind me saying, "Michael, hurry up! I want that room clear before lunch." Her plan was accelerating, and she didn't know I was about to accelerate mine.
I found Michael alone in the hallway that afternoon, standing beside the boxes Melissa had stacked like she was preparing for a move. He looked smaller than I remembered, shoulders slumped, eyes tired. It's strange how your children age in ways you don't notice until the light hits them just right. I put a hand on the railing to steady myself before speaking. I could feel a dull ache fluttering behind my ribs from the morning's discoveries. "Michael," I said, keeping my voice low, "can we talk for a minute? Just us." He hesitated, just a flicker, but followed me into the den. The door clicked shut softly behind him. I could hear my own breathing in that quiet room, just a half step heavier than usual. My heart felt like it was pressing outward against my ribs, a slow burn. Age makes stress feel heavier, like carrying a pail of wet sand instead of water. I turned to face him. "Son," I said, "I've seen the mortgage notices, the debt, the auction date, and I need you to tell me the truth. Did you know any of this was happening?" Michael's head snapped up, and I saw panic in his eyes. He shook his head. "No, Dad, I didn't. She said everything was under control." There was a tremor in his voice. I recognized it. It was the same tone he had as a boy when he'd broken something precious and didn't know how to fix it. I stepped closer. "You have to listen to me. This isn't under control. The house is days away from being taken. You and Lily, you'll lose everything." Before he could answer, the door swung open. Melissa walked in, arms crossed, chin up, eyes sharp. She didn't even look at Michael. She looked straight at me. "What are you filling his head with now?" she said. "This is why I said you shouldn't wander around the house. You get confused. You misread things." There it was, the insult, the setup for the echo that would come later. My age, used like a weapon against me. I felt something twist deep in my chest then, an old, familiar sting, the kind that radiates outward in a slow, pulsing ache. Betrayal hurts differently when it comes from someone your family let in the door. I held out my hand toward Michael. "Son, let me talk to you. Just you, please." But Melissa moved between us. "No, he doesn't need your outdated advice. He doesn't know how finances work, remember? He told me that himself." Michael's eyes darted away. Shame, fear, confusion. She had wrapped him so tightly in guilt he couldn't see he was suffocating. I tried one more time, my voice softer than before. "I'm offering you both a chance to come clean, to tell me the truth. If we work together, we can fix this." Melissa laughed, a sharp, cold sound. "Fix what? Your imagination? You don't know what you're talking about. You're old, you're sentimental, you're stuck in the past. Leave the important decisions to people who understand modern life." That did it. Not anger, something colder, a final confirmation. You can give a person a bridge, but if they choose the cliff, there's nothing more you can do. I felt my pulse flutter, like a bird flapping against a cage. I had offered peace, I had offered honesty, and she slapped it back with the same smugness she used when she pointed at that basement door. I nodded. "All right," I said quietly, "if that's your choice." She smirked, thinking she'd won something. But I already knew what I was going to do next. The morning of the takedown came with a strange kind of calm. When you're older, adrenaline doesn't hit you the way it used to. It's quieter, more like a slow tightening in your chest and a steadying of your hands. I woke up before the sun, sat on the edge of my bed, and let my breath settle into a rhythm. Today wasn't about emotion. Today was about precision. And precision was the one thing age had sharpened, not dulled. The debt transfer had gone through late the night before. It took a string of calls, a favor from Carl, and every bit of knowledge I'd earned from decades tracing financial trails. There's a moment in buying distressed debt where the system hesitates, a little processing window that only professionals know how to slip through. I timed it down to the second, watching the digital transfer bar move like a rising tide. When the final confirmation hit, I felt a cold wave of clarity run through me. The house was mine now, legally, permanently, quietly. I stood in the living room doorway and watched Melissa parade her friends through the house like a hostess on a reality show. They carried iced drinks and wore bright workout clothes, all talking loudly about vision boards and manifesting their dream home. Melissa pointed at Lily's empty bedroom with a sweep of her arm. "This will be my gym. I'm finally getting the life I deserve." The life she deserved. That line almost made me laugh, but my heart gave a small skip, one of those fluttering beats that makes you press your hand to your chest until it settles. I leaned on the hallway wall for a moment, just letting my breath catch. When it steadied, I stepped into the room. "Melissa," I said, "I need everyone in the living room for a moment." She didn't turn around at first. "Not now, we're busy." Her friends looked uncomfortable, sensing something in my tone. I've learned over the years that when an old man speaks quietly, people listen harder. One by one, they followed me. Melissa followed last, annoyed and dismissive. I stood near the fireplace and pulled the folded papers from my coat pocket. Thick documents, sealed stamps, the kind of paperwork that carries real weight. Melissa crossed her arms. "What now?" she said. "Another one of your lectures about responsibility?" "No," I said, "just facts." I opened the foreclosure notice first, laying it on the coffee table. The red-lettered amounts stared back at her. She blinked, confused. Her friends exchanged glances. Then I placed the second document beside it, the debt transfer. She frowned. "What am I looking at?" "You're looking," I said, "at the foreclosure you hid from my son, and at the legal transfer of debt ownership processed yesterday. This house went into auction, and I bought the debt, all of it." Her face drained of color so quickly it reminded me of someone falling through ice. She stepped forward, grabbing the papers with shaking hands. This can't be real. You don't even understand mortgages. You said so yourself." I shook my head. "No, Melissa, you said that." One of her friends let out a small, shocked whistle. Another whispered, "Is this legal?" The embarrassment hit Melissa harder than any shouting could have. Her perfect posture folded in on itself. She looked around the room, waiting for someone to save her, but nobody spoke. "My professional field for 40 years was financial investigation," I said. "I know every inch of the system you tried to hide behind." She opened her mouth, but nothing came out, only a tiny, broken sound. That was the moment the trap fully snapped shut. And the panic in her eyes told me she finally understood. She had never been the one in control. The room felt smaller now, like the walls were leaning in to listen. Melissa stood frozen with the documents in her hands, her friends looking at each other in the way people do when they realized they showed up for a casual morning hangout and accidentally walked into a courtroom. I could feel my pulse beating in my neck, not fast, just deep. That kind of slow thud you get when the stakes are high, but your resolve is higher. I took the papers back from her gently. "Since you said I misunderstand mortgages," I said, unfolding the first sheet, "let's go through this together, nice and slow." Her cheeks flushed. She looked over her shoulder as if someone might swoop in to rescue her from the embarrassment pooling at her feet. I held up the foreclosure notice. "This is the first missed payment, dated 8 months ago. Amount due, $1,912. I flicked to the next one. "Second notice, 5 months ago,
Now it's $4,000 and change. Her friend, a woman in a bright pink tank top, whispered, "You didn't tell us you were behind on the mortgage?" Melissa snapped, "I told you, he's twisting something. He always twists things." I ignored her and laid the next document flat on the coffee table. "This is the mail redirection request. Signature? Yours. Not my son's. Not once." Michael had come out of the hallway by then, drawn in by the rising tension. When he saw the signature, his face dropped like someone had yanked the ground from under him. "Melissa, why would you do that?" She stepped back. "You weren't handling things. I had to take control." "No," I said quietly. "You took control of hiding the truth." I opened the last set of papers, the ones from her personal account. Statements showing charges for spa packages, a high-end bicycle, weekly beauty treatments, all paid from the same pot that should have covered the mortgage. Every line item felt like a hammer hitting the table. I tapped one transaction with my finger. This one was $300 for a cryosculpt session. That same week, you told my granddaughter she needed to sleep in a basement because you needed space. One of her friends covered her mouth. Another shook her head slowly, muttering something that sounded like, "Wow, just wow." Then the doorbell rang. I knew exactly who it was. The front door opened and Judge Harmon stepped inside. I'd known him for 40 years, back when he was a young attorney trying to make sense of messy cases. Now he carried himself like a man used to being the final word in the room. "Sorry to intrude," he said. "I was asked to verify a property transfer." Melissa stiffened. "You called a judge? For what?" Judge Harmon adjusted his glasses and looked directly at her. "Ma'am, I am here to confirm that this property is now under new ownership, and to review concerns regarding potential financial misconduct." He turned to her friends. "If you ladies need to step outside, feel free." None of them moved. Witnesses love a story, especially when it's not theirs. I handed the judge the packet. She redirected notices, depleted shared funds, and hid the foreclosure from the primary homeowner. And she was in the middle of clearing out a child's room to build herself a gym. Judge Harmon nodded slowly, eyes narrowing the way they do when he's fitting puzzle pieces together. Then he looked at Melissa. "Do you deny these documents?" Her voice came out small. "He's just old. He reads things wrong." That was the wrong sentence to choose. The judge's eyebrow lifted. "I assure you, age is not an argument in your favor here." The room went dead quiet. I leaned in, repeating her own line with the same soft tone she once used on me. "She likes the quiet down there." This time, the words hit the way they were always meant to.
Judge Harmon didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Some people carry authority the way mountains carry snow, quietly, heavily, undeniably. He stood there in the center of the living room, reading through the documents one by one. Every turn of a page sounded like a courtroom gavel to me. I felt my shoulders slowly loosen, like a tight rope finally being unknotted. My heart still thudded, but not with panic this time, more like the echo of a long fight nearing its end. Melissa stood rigid, arms glued to her sides, her face pale beneath her perfect makeup. Michael hovered behind her, confusion and shame written across him like someone had carved it there. Lily peeked from the hallway, and when our eyes met, that alone gave me the strength to stand straighter. Judge Harmon looked up. "I find substantial evidence of deliberate concealment, financial misappropriation, and the intentional redirection of legally required notices." He turned to Michael. "Sir, were you aware of any of this?" Michael shook his head. "No, I trusted her." Melissa snapped. "I did what I had to do. He wouldn't understand how money works." The judge held up one hand. "Enough." She fell silent instantly.
Even her friends shrank back a step. "Ma'am," he continued, "your actions jeopardize the stability of this household. You placed a minor child in unsafe living conditions. You diverted funds. You concealed legal notices. And you attempted to use this home as collateral for personal vanity projects." He exhaled, a controlled breath that meant judgment was settled. "This property is now legally under the ownership of the gentleman standing behind me." Her eyes darted to me like I had betrayed her, when all I had done was finally stop her. Judge Harmon glanced around the room. "You are hereby ordered to vacate the premises immediately. If you interfere further, formal charges will be filed." Melissa's mouth opened and closed like she was gasping for air. "You can't be serious! You're all letting an old man manipulate you. He doesn't even understand basic paperwork." That was the moment the judge turned fully toward her, his expression calm but carved from granite. "I assure you, he understands it far better than you ever did." Her legs gave out just a little, and she had to steady herself on the arm of a chair. The humiliation washed over her, not loud or dramatic, but devastatingly slow, like sinking into cold water inch by inch. I stepped forward then, not with anger, with clarity. And in front of everyone, her friends, my son, the judge, I repeated the words she'd once used on me, delivering them back with the weight of truth behind them. "You said I wouldn't understand how mortgages work." I paused and let the silence hold her still. "Turns out, Melissa, I understand them just fine." The verbal boomerang hit its mark. She flinched like I'd struck her, but I hadn't touched her at all. My breath caught for a moment then, not in fear, but in a strange kind of release. A long-held tightness unwound from my chest. My knees felt a little weak, the way they do after standing too long in the cold. But this time, the weakness felt earned, like my body knew a storm had passed. Michael looked at me, eyes glassy. "Dad, I didn't know." "I know," I said softly, "but now you do." Judge Harmon gathered his documents and nodded at me, a silent acknowledgement between old men who had seen enough human greed to last 3 lifetimes. Melissa's friends slipped out quietly, whispers trailing behind them like loose threads. And with them went the last of her pride. I put a hand on the railing to steady myself, not from age this time, but from relief. A slow, warm kind that spread through my chest like someone had finally opened a window in a stale room. It was over. Or at least the storm was. Now came the part where I would tell the truth. Not just to them, but to everyone watching. The house felt different after Melissa left. Quieter, yes, but in a peaceful way. The kind of quiet that lets you breathe all the way down to your stomach. Michael sat on the couch, hands clasped, staring at the floor as if he was trying to piece together how his own life had gotten away from him. Lily sat beside him, her tiny hand wrapped around his arm, leaning against him like she'd been waiting for this moment of safety. I walked over slowly. My joints reminded me I'd been on my feet too long, but there was a lightness in my legs that hadn't been there in months. I lowered myself into the chair across from them. It took 2 motions instead of 1, but that's age for you. You'll learn to adjust. Michael finally spoke. "Dad, I'm sorry. I should have seen it." I shook my head. "No, you loved her, and when you love someone, you want to believe them. It doesn't make you weak, it makes you human." Lily looked up at me. "Are we safe now, Grandpa?" Those 4 words went straight through me. I leaned forward and brushed her hair back. "Yes, sweetheart, you're safe. This is your home. It always will be." Her shoulders loosened, and she leaned into her father. Watching her do that felt like watching a knot unwind inside my chest. I stood and walked through the house once more. Every room carried a memory, some good, some painful, but all of them mattered. The picture frames, the worn banister I'd sanded years ago, the workshop out back where Michael used to help me fix old bikes. This wasn't just four walls. This was the last piece of my wife's legacy, the foundation of our family, and now it was protected. As the afternoon sunlight filled the living room, I felt something settle over me. Not triumph, not victory, peace. A kind of peace only old men truly understand. As an old man, I've learned that God doesn't always stop the storm. Sometimes He waits, lets the clouds build, lets the wind howl, and then hands you the strength to walk straight through it. Grandpa's stories like mine remind us that justice isn't always loud or flashy. Sometimes it's a quiet knocking at the door, a signature on a page, a truth laid bare in front of those who once doubted you. And sometimes it's knowing when to act, even when your knees shake and your heart flutters like it's trying to warn you of the weight you're carrying. I believe God puts certain battles in front of us not to break us, but to remind us we're still strong enough to fight for the innocent, strong enough to protect what matters, strong enough to say, not in this house, not this child, not today. Before I end this story, let me ask you something. When life hands you a moment where you must choose between silence and protection, between comfort and doing what's right, which road do you take? Tell me in the comments how you would have handled a situation like this. I read every answer, and these conversations matter.